elections and redistricting. The purpose of today's meeting is for the committee to have discussion only on the proposed redistricting criteria. I do want to kind of go over the scheduling for the week, just so that the committee and the public are aware of that. So we have scheduled 3 meetings of the committee for this week, first one being today. The next meeting tomorrow will begin at 8:30. It will be a 2-hour meeting for public comment on the criteria. The website will have available sign-up for members of the public that want to reserve a slot to come into the committee and speak to the committee. So there will be 30 slots available on the website, just to take into account that there may be folks that want to come and speak that show up that weren't aware of the way to sign up online. So since we're doing a 2-hour public meeting, we anticipate each speaker will be given 2 minutes as their allotment of time to speak. So we anticipate that we could have roughly 60 speakers tomorrow morning. Understand that this room is limited in size, so most likely there's going to be a number of the speakers that will have to wait in a queue outside, and our sergeants at arms will be aware of that, and they'll be able to usher in speakers as one speaker speaks and leaves, and the next one can come in. Thursday's meeting will also begin at 8:30, and that will be the meeting to adopt criteria. We expect that meeting to last about an hour. And I would just encourage the committee members to submit your amendments. We invite you to submit your amendments to the criteria in advance so that they can be reviewed in advance and not disrupt the committee time, where we might have to, if we get a last-minute amendment, we may need to take a recess to look at it or something like that. So if you give it to us in advance, then the chairs can look at that. Today, the purpose of today's meeting is for the chairs, to present to you what we believe is the best criteria for this committee to adopt moving forward in the process. And Senator Newton is going to give the overview of that in a moment. I think that kind of covers most of the housekeeping matters, other than I did neglect to recognize the sergeants at arms, and I may have misplaced my list. Let's see. We have 6 sergeants at arms here serving our committee today. In the House, we have Terry McCraw, Bill Moore, and Nina Lodge, and in the Senate, Terry Barnhart, John Enlow, and Mike Harris. One final thing is that when Senator Newton's going to go through the criteria one by one, we ask that you just hold your questions until the end, and then we'll get to all the questions at that time. And anything else, Senator Newton, that I need to?
Representative Hall is down.
There is Chairman Hall is caught in a traffic jam, but should be here momentarily, so we're keeping tabs on his location. I know when I drove in earlier today, I had to go through 2 truck wrecks, actually. So I know there's a lot of hazards out there. So Senator Newton, if you're ready, I'll turn the mic over to you, and please.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Representative Dixon.
I didn't hear the time for the Thursday meeting.
So the 2 subsequent meetings after today will begin at 8:30.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. I suppose this would be the portion that is for the auditory learners, because we do have in front of you, you should have both electronically and available a paper copy of the proposed criteria. So I'm going to walk you through each one. First is equal population. No, people do not have copies. I'll ask the staff. Here we go.
And the criteria are posted on the committee website, I believe.
So raise your hand if you need a copy.
So the tree huggers are the ones that do not have their hands raised.
All right. Everybody got one that needs one? I see no hands raised, so we'll go ahead. So the first criterion is equal population. The committees will use the 2020 federal decennial census data as the sole basis of population for the establishment of districts in the 2021 congressional, House, and Senate plans. The number of persons in each legislative district shall be within plus or minus 5% of the ideal district population as determined by the most recent federal decennial census. The number of persons in each congressional district shall be as nearly as equal as practicable as determined under the most recent federal decennial census. Criterion number 2 is contiguity. Legislative and congressional districts shall be comprised of contiguous territory. Contiguity by water is sufficient. The third criterion is counties, groupings, and traversals. Counties, groupings, and traversals. The committees shall draw legislative districts within county groupings as required by Stevenson v. Bartlett. I'll spare you the legal citations, but it's Stevenson 1, Stevenson 2, Dickinson 1, Dickinson 2, and within county groupings, county lines shall not be traversed except as authorized by Stevenson 1, Stevenson 2, Dixon 1, and Dixon 2. The full citations are there for those of you who are interested. Criterion number 4, racial data. Data identifying the race of individuals or voters shall not be used in the construction or consideration of districts in the 2021 congressional, House, and Senate plans. Criterion 5, VTDs. Voting districts should be split only when necessary. Criterion 6, compactness. The committees shall make reasonable efforts to draw legislative districts in the 2021 congressional, House, and Senate plans that are compact. In doing so, the committee may use as a guide the minimum REOC, that's dispersion, and Polsby-Popper perimeter scores identified by Richard Pieldes and Richard Nemi in Expressive Harms, Bizarre Districts, and Voting Rights, Evaluating Election District Appearances after Shaw v. Reno. So that's a law review article. Criterion number 7 is municipal boundaries. The committees may consider municipal boundaries when drawing districts in the 2021 congressional, House, and Senate plans. 8th criterion is election data. Partisan considerations and election results data shall not be used in the drawing of districts in the 2021 congressional, House, and Senate plans. Criterion number 9, member residence. Member residence may be considered in the formation of legislative and congressional districts. And the final criterion, criterion number 10, community consideration. So long as a plan complies with the foregoing criteria, local knowledge of the character of communities and connections between communities may be considered in the formation of legislative and congressional districts. So, Mr. Chair, that covers the criteria themselves, and at this point, we'd be happy to do our best to answer questions that members may have.
Thank you, Senator Newton. I do want to, if I could refer you back to criteria 3.
Yes.
County groupings and traversals. I believe you did not read the section on congressional criteria.
Oh, I apologize. You were right. That's the break in the page. So let's go back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to criterion number 3, counties, groupings, and traversals, and add to what I described. Division of counties in the 2021 congressional plan shall only be made for reasons of equalizing population and consideration of double bunking. If a county is of sufficient population size to contain an entire congressional district within the county's boundaries, the committees shall construct a district entirely within that county. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Newton. And Senator Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, since the equal population section does not mention the zero deviation standard as it has in the past, what does the chair plan to impose in terms of a deviation requirement for congressional districts?
I think, Senator Clark, that criteria is intended to be a zero deviation standard. We understand the wording to be that we're going to adopt a zero deviation standard for congressional districts.
Follow-up?
Follow-up.
Mr. Chair, given the fact that the differential privacy is going to create the blocks that do not have exact populations, what use is it to have a zero deviation standard for congressional districts?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Newton.
What Senator Clark is referring to is differential privacy that has injected, but the federal government has injected noise into the to the data for privacy purposes. We can't change that. There's nothing we can do about that. So it's still the best data we have. So we will continue with these criteria with the data they provide us. Mr. Chair.
Follow-up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. What does the General Assembly plan to do in terms of the VRA? What are our legal requirements, if any?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Newton.
We intend to comply with the Voting Rights Act.
Mr. Chair.
The gentleman is recognized for a series of questions.
Okay. In the counties, groupings, and traversals, as I guess the speaker indicated, that we could modify or, I guess, get an exemption to the traversal requirement based upon the requirements of or authorizations of Stevenson 1, 2, and Dixon 1 and 2. What are those exemptions that would allow us to violate the traversal requirement?
I think the holdings, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the holdings in those cases speak for themselves, and I'm not going to try to recharacterize those for you here.
Could staff enlighten us, please?
Ms. Churchill, is that a question you can answer?
Mr. Chair, that is not a question. We have studied up on those cases in depth preparing for this. We're happy to review those cases and report back to Senator Clark.
Let's see. No more questions at this time.
Any other members that would like to make a question, have a question or a comment? Senator Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask about the 2 bullet points. One is the voting districts bullet point and then the municipal boundaries bullet points. I noticed that sometimes when we talk about not splitting the VTDs or municipal boundaries, we talk about them in the same sentence. I noticed they're broken out here in 2 separate bullet points, and I wonder if that's on purpose, if they will be handled differently. I guess the first question is the VTD should only be split when necessary. In the past, we've said when necessary to comply with population requirements, but here we're just ending it with when necessary. What is the intent there? is it, as we've done before, to deal with population differences, or would something else be considered in there as well? And then I have a follow-up about the
Senator
municipal.
Newton, do you have a comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Marcus, I'm not aware of any substantive change created by that break in the sentence.
A follow-up.
Follow-up?
Is it implied that when necessary means to comply with the population requirements set forth above then? Or is there a reason why it just says when necessary, period?
My belief is that refers to sort of the hierarchy, if you will, of the criteria, and where a criterion is legally mandated, that takes priority over the question you're asking. So I think that's the answer. We're going to comply with the law, even if it's necessary to do something we may not prefer to do with respect to a VTT.
Okay, and then if I could, on the municipal boundaries part, it says that committee may consider municipal boundaries, but it doesn't say anything about attempting not to split municipalities. Is that what is intended to be said here, that we're going to try to keep municipalities together when possible? I'm just not sure what it means to say that we could consider the boundaries without saying in what way we're considering them or for what purpose we're considering them.
Right. So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Newton.
this is new to the congressional criteria, but not to the state and House processes. So by respecting, we mean we're going to make an effort to keep them whole.
Okay, I would just point out that that's not spelled out in any way here, so I would recommend that we consider that. And if I can have one more question, Mr. Chair.
Follow-up, Senator Marcus.
Thank you. And then on the member residence, I notice it also says that member residence may be considered in the formation of legislative and congressional districts. It doesn't say for what purpose. It doesn't say, as we have in the past sometimes, to protect incumbents or to avoid double bunking. It just says that you can consider where members live. And it doesn't say if we do it for one, we should do it for all, or if we don't do it, when we should do it. And I wondered if there's any more you could enlighten us on what's intended by that bullet point.
Senator Newton.
Thank you. I think what you said is accurate. It reads the way it reads and means what it means, and there's a degree of flexibility when and if we have to cross that bridge.
Okay, so I'm hearing you saying you agree it's to a certain extent vague and you want to keep it that way.
Well, no. Well, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that that's an appropriate criterion to allow us to consider residents when we're drawing districts. If you've got, well, period.
Okay, thank you.
And again, this is a discussion period for members to look at the criteria and suggest amendments that might be beneficial to the body. Senator Clark, you have another question?
Yes, I have a question since you mentioned the amendments. In what form should we submit the amendments? And I guess we can start at any time tomorrow, or is it after the public hearing tomorrow?
I mean, you could submit them anytime between now and Thursday, and even at Thursday's meeting, it just might be helpful to submit them before Thursday. Can staff help members put that in it's not like a bill format.
Right. So that's why I was wondering, how do you want that handled in a particular way? Just a paragraph, put this in instead of that or something?
Mr. Chair, we are happy to assist any member who wants to submit some sort of changes or alterations. We will do our best to come up with a method that will be understandable. What is the difference between the proposed criteria and the suggested criteria? Obviously, it's not going to look exactly like a bill or an amendment, but we will do our best to help members come up with something consistent so that the committee will have hopefully an ease of consideration.
And I think along those lines, if you could, when you're drafting it, if you can kind of make it so that it's, redlined like a normal amendment would be, so that the members can see what the suggested change is.
Yes, sir. I'm glad to try.
Question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir. Senator Clark.
Okay. On your bullet here, under election data, you indicate that election results data shall not be used in the drawing of districts in the 2021 congressional House and Senate plans. can election data be used for the analysis of such plans that have been submitted via ensemble analysis?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Would you mind repeating that question?
So I think, Senator Clark, to answer your question, is that this, and this is just the same criteria we had in 2019, that election data will not be used on the public computers in drawing districts.
Okay.
After a district is, after a proposed map is drawn, then members can ask staff to, to overlay whatever they want on it, as far as that goes.
Oh, that's good. We weren't able to do that the last time because I inquired.
Is that right?
Yeah. They didn't load election data into the system the last time.
Okay, so staff's telling me that I'm not remembering 2019 correctly and that we didn't have election data entered into the public terminals.
Mr. Chair, if I might, in 2019, for the public drawing terminals that were available to each member to utilize, there was no election data, there was no voter registration data. However, we did have a means, if Senator Clark will remember, that we could export that plan into a database to actually report out some reports to utilize the voter registration and the election data. We can set up to do that again this time if that is what the committee's desire.
Mr.
And so
Chair.
at this point, the committee hasn't, we'll adopt the policies of the committee with respect to map drawing, and we just haven't done that yet.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Follow up.
Mr. Chairman, ma'am,
Senator Newton?
I'd like to address that. But as we are talking about criteria, it is the intent of number 8, election data, as worded, to say that election results data and maps drawn using that data will not be considered by this committee. Thank you.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Senator Clark?
Does that apply to the selection of county cluster groupings as well?
Senator Newton?
I believe the answer to that is yes, subject to check.
Follow up.
Follow up.
I notice we do not mention the selection of county grouping and clusters within this criteria. Is it the chair's intent that we include such elements in the criteria?
Can you repeat your question?
I notice that we do not mention the selection of county groupings for the Senate or for the House in this set of criteria. Is it our intent to include such criteria for the selection thereof? We have mentioned the calculation of the criteria groups, but we don't say how we're going to select from amongst the set of maps that will be available or constitutionally compliant from each one.
Senator Newton?
I would just say to that, Senator Clark, this provision on, and I've got as number 3, counties, groupings, and traversals, is substantially similar to what we used in 2019. And we were successful there, getting court approval of that effort.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Clark?
we didn't make a selection of the county groupings in 2019. The original county groupings were selected in 2011. And actually, they weren't really selected. Only one was introduced for the Senate and one was introduced for the House. And at that time, there were actually 4 constitutionally compliant cluster sets available for the Senate. So really, I want to know what is going to be our process from selecting amongst constitutionally compliant clusters for the Senate and for the House during this effort.
Well, I know I've served in 3 different districts in the last 10 years, so I'm not sure your statement is correct. So I don't know if we can chew on that and try to get back to you.
Okay.
Any other questions from the committee? Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on a point that I'd made on Thursday's committee meeting. And I think you alluded to this a bit in terms of transparency, the transparency that I believe was required by the ruling in the Common Cause decision, but also the public participation piece. Are we going to set that out? Can we set that out now? Can we set this out when we adopt the criteria on Thursday? There's been a lot of interest in public participation and how that will play out with this redistricting process.
So I think the chairs don't anticipate scheduling the public hearing or establishing the public hearing schedule this week, but we will notice a future meeting, whether it's next week or the week after, to try to schedule that, and would anticipate probably that starting in September, I would think. I mean, the House is, everybody's sort of got preoccupied with the budget at the moment.
Just quick follow-up. So,
Follow-up?
thank you. I just also, the issue about the transparency, we'll be adopting that at the next meeting as well.
If you're talking about the process by which maps will be drawn, there will be a subsequent meeting at which the committee will have to adopt all of the rules that we're going to follow in the map drawing process, which I guess would include the transparency.
Last follow-up, and I very much appreciate that. Needs to be pointed out, we spent a lot of money, I think something like $10 million defending maps. That's just state taxpayer money spent on defending maps, so I hope we can adopt a process that we can all agree to will serve the public the best, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, I know that probably all of you are eager to get to other committee meetings, so this meeting will stand adjourned, and we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 8:30. Is that correct? Okay. Tomorrow morning, 8:30.